Okay, so back to the presentation. So today I'm going to be talking about university attrition as well as student support. Specifically, I'm going to be trying to answer 4 questions. The first one is, why is attrition important? The second one is, how are different universities performing? And whether we can explain some of the differences between different universities. Lastly, once we've identified the risks and the problems, how can we better support students? So, why do we care about attrition? We care about attrition because students care about attrition. Most students give a career-related purpose as their main reason for attending university. In fact, about 87% of first-year students nominated improving their career prospects as a reason for attending. It is also worth noting that studying something that interests them and they're passionate about is also a popular reason. And for those who want to improve their career prospects, completing a degree provides a good foundation and often a prerequisite for one. While some companies like Google, EY, or PwC start to relax their degree requirement, having a degree is still good insurance against not having a job. So this chart is based on the ABS survey from 2017, looking at the unemployment rate as well as the not in the labour force. And as you can see, the unemployment rate among graduates was about 2.5%, and among school leavers, it's nearly twice that at 4.5%. And we see a similar story for not in the labour force as well. The story is similar for the chance of getting professional or managerial jobs. Graduates are more likely, overwhelmingly more likely to get a job as a professional or a manager compared to school leavers. On top of this, we also know that students prefer to have a degree. So this chart is based on an online survey Grattan did at the end of last year. Our focus was on students who dropped out of their degree. A big caveat on this survey is that it's not a gold standard way of doing survey like the Social Research Centre would have done. So Lisa may not approve of this, but certainly we tried our best, and we thought that that was a real hole in what we don't know about, what students want to get from their education, and especially those who dropped out and why. So we did this online survey. We hosted on Facebook, which obviously not the best organisation in handling data securely, but we did manage to get nearly 500 respondents, largely just to kind of promote it on our social media kind of means, various Twitter and all these things through Grattan. And so this chart shows the result from one of the questions, which asks, would you be in a better position now if you had finished your degree? And overwhelmingly, those who dropped out said yes, they would be in a better position. So students care and want to finish. Now, in terms of public policy, there are also more students in the system. And that also means that there are more students who we would expect to drop out. Since the introduction of the demand system in 2008, the number of enrolments grew by nearly 50%. The demand-driven has been frozen for this year and the next year, but we still have many more students than we would otherwise without the system. And so are the numbers of those who we would expect to drop out and leave without a degree. The growth in student numbers brought in many more non-traditional students as well. For example, the number of students with an ATAR of between 30 and 50 nearly tripled since 2008. And the growth in online and part-time was also high. For example, with the online, so that nearly doubled. So that more than doubled since 2008. So that's just the number of students. Now, let's have a look at how the sector is doing with many more non-traditional students. This chart shows the retention rate. So essentially, this means a proportion of commencing students who return to study the next year. Not necessarily the same course or at the same university, just returning to a university. And for some of you who are familiar with the new definition, the department's new definition of adjusted attrition rate, this is essentially the same as the adjusted retention rate. Overall retention rate improved in the late 2000s and deteriorated since. That said, the overall rate is still no worse than in 2006, which was about 80%, a bit over 80%. Now let's have a look at how different universities are doing. So this chart shows the retention rate for universities in New South Wales by the students' commencing year. Retention rate has been largely stable in New South Wales, as you can see there. Telstra and UNE, so University of New England, saw some deterioration in recent years, but overall it's largely stable among different universities. Similarly for universities in South Australia. University of Adelaide had the highest retention rate of about 87% over those 10 years. While for University of South Australia and Flinders, their rate hovered around 83%, so slightly lower, but has been relatively stable. Now let's have a look at Queensland. Among Queensland institutions, the trend has been quite positive. Notably, CQU had the lowest retention rate in 2006. By 2015, it surpassed places like University of Sunshine Coast, as well as University of Southern Queensland. Now for Victoria. We see a mixed story in Victoria. Some universities saw an improvement in retention, like Melbourne and Monash, but some deteriorated quite significantly. For example, at Swinburne, retention rate went from 85% in 2010 to about 70% in 2013. That said, it bounced back to about 75% in 2015. We also saw a mixed story at multi-state institutions. Retention rate improved slightly at ANU, but at University of Tasmania, retention fell by about 20 percentage points, from 80 to 60%. With such a diverse trend, my next question is, how can we explain some of these differences? Are there commonalities, the main contributors to these differences? Grattan did some work on this using the Department of Education and Training data set early this year, at the end of last year, looking at retention rate. And what we're looking for was to identify the risk factors that contribute to students' chance of not finishing a degree. We control for many factors like disciplinary effects, institutional effects, as well as family background. So this chart just shows some of the variables that we've used in the model. So this is collected by, different universities through the collated together by the Department of Education and Training. Instead of looking at a yearly retention rate, we looked at a longer time frame. And the reason for that is simply because students come in and out of the system. They take a year off or two and then return and then eventually finish. And what we want to do is to better measure their chance of actually completing a degree. And that's why we kind of look at a longer time frame. But given the restrictions in the data set, we actually look at the completion over 8 years. We also look at 9 and 10 years, but few students finish during those 2 years. Now, let's have a look at the results. So the first thing I want to look at is online. So this chart shows the risk of not completing a degree over 8 years by students' mode of study, so online or on campus. So the higher risk, the higher chance of dropping out. So after controlling for other factors, online is not a strong risk indicator for dropping out. On average, about 3 in every 10 on-campus students are not expected to complete. And studying online increases that risk by a small amount. On the other hand, the story is different for part-time. Part-time study significantly increases the risk of not completing. So this chart shows that the fewer the subjects students take in their first year, the higher the risk they face of dropping out, controlling for other factors like family background, SCS, online, and other things that you saw in the previous chart. So students who take more than 6 subjects in their first year face a risk of about 20%, which is relatively low considering the average is about 30%. Effectively, this means 1 in every 5 students are not expected to finish. By contrast, students who take 3 or 4 subjects, so that's essentially half a full-time load, they would have a chance of finishing about 50%. So the chance of finishing is about 50-50. The odds are even worse for students who study fewer subjects, as you can see there down the end. Note though that this doesn't mean that part-time study directly causes dropout, but it does mean that part-time study is strongly associated with a high chance of dropping out, controlling for other factors. And perhaps, unsurprisingly, ATAR is also important. Risk generally increases as ATAR falls. Students who have an ATAR of 90 or above have a low risk of less than 20%. The risk doubles among students with an ATAR in the 60s. The effect of ATAR plateaus with ATARs below 60, and we think that's largely because of the ATAR and study score conversion where there's a bell curve. So why do these students drop out? So for part-time students, juggling study with other live commitments is the main differentiating reason. So this chart shows that part-time students are at least twice as likely to consider leaving because of work